So I've gone ahead and done all of my cutting. I have everything kind of separated here. I've also gone ahead and done step 1, which is fusing. So there's not a lot of fusing because I've chosen to use cork for the outside. So for my zippered pocket, I just have 2 of my 4 pieces with interfacing. And for my lining, I have those interfaced. And other than that, I don't have anything else interfaced because I don't need to. I've gone on to step 2 as well, and I've cut with my templates. So I've cut my accents with template 3, my outsides with template 1, and my lining pieces with template 2. I've also gone ahead and trimmed my gussets and trimmed the zippered pocket pieces as per the pattern. So now I'm going to move on to step 3, which is preparing my card pockets. So I'm just going to get the rest of these out of the way. I'm going to take this over to the ironing board, fold each of these, and top stitch them exactly as the pattern has indicated, and then I will be ready to add them to my lining. Now that all my card pockets are top stitched, I am ready to add them onto my lining pieces. I've gone ahead and used the measurements in the pattern on step 4, lined up my first pocket. I do get both of them ready so I can take both lining pieces over. Since I'm doing the same thing on both sides, it's just easier to have them both ready to sew. So I'm going to take these to the machine and stitch down here along this bottom edge, add pocket number 2 to both sides, and then add my third pocket. Now that all of my card pockets are sewn in place, in order to finish up step 4, I've trimmed my edges nice and clean. I usually do that from the back side so I can see where I want to trim. A lot of times these card pockets will shift because they don't have interfacing and it's not a big deal. So just go ahead and trim up your edges so they're nice and even. I've marked my center, I've marked my sides as per the pattern, and I'm going to take this to the machine and stitch. When I stitch pockets like this, I like to start down here at the bottom. So up to the top, turn, and come back down. I do that on all sides, that way it's nice and secure, and that stitching that's going to be on the outside here just needs to be less than 1/4 of an inch just to base those edges down. You don't want to start construction of your wallet and have any of your pockets not be secure. So you might notice that on this one, I'm a little off from the edge here. I did not quite make it, so my card pocket shifted a lot to the left, but that's okay because it's still less than 1/4, so it's going to catch. If I need to, I can give them a little gentle tug, but what I'll do is I'll just stitch them down right along their edges to make sure that they don't move, and then I will be ready to move on to step 5. Lining pieces are both done. I've trimmed my threads. I have my card pockets all stitched down. They are stitched across here in the center, on the sides, and as well as on the very edges as per the pattern. So I'm going to set those aside, and now I'm going to work on my gussets. These were already trimmed. In the pattern, it's going to instruct you to put them right sides together before you trim. For me, it doesn't much matter because I'm using batiks, but for you, if you're using a regular cotton, you'll have these in pairs. You have 4 pairs, and you're going to take this to your machine, and with a 1/4 of an inch stitch, you're just going to stitch those straight sides. You don't want to stitch that side that has an angle. My gussets are all prepared. I've gone ahead and stitched, trimmed, and pressed them. There is an option if you would prefer to top stitch along the top edge, which is the wider edge. I usually skip that, but if you would like to, you can go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to add these onto my lining pieces. So I'm just going to align the bottom raw edge right here with the raw edge of the pocket and the bottom of the card pocket. I'm just going to clip that in place. So this bottom corner is touching the card pocket. My raw edges are facing the same direction. So this one's going to go the opposite way. And just like that, I'll add a clip. And now I'm ready, and I'm just going to base these along the edges less than a quarter to keep them in place. Now I'm going to assemble my zippered pocket. So I have my zipper here. I have my 2 pieces with interfacing and my 2 without. And yes, I use the same fabric for this. You could absolutely use 2 different fabrics, but I just found it easier this way. So my interface piece is the outside. My lining piece does not have interfacing. And the wider part is the top. So I'm just going to take the piece with interfacing. I have that with the right side up. I'm going to take my zipper and place that right side down. My zipper pull is hanging off the edge, but that's okay for right now. It's not going to hurt anything until I'm ready to close up the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and just clip that in place. You can also pin if you prefer. Now I'm going to take one of my lining pieces, put that right on top, aligning those edges, and just move my clips. I like to do it separately so that nothing shifts. So now that it's ready to go, I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch across here. Best tip that I can give you for sewing something with interfacing and something without is to turn this over. Put this in your machine just like so. If you stitch with the interface piece on top, it is much less likely to shift and bow on you. My zipper pocket is all stitched and it is a little bit uneven down at the bottom here, which happens to me quite a bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a little bit of a trim. There's no wrong answer here. You're just making your pocket a little bit shorter, so that's totally fine. And just like that. I think I need a new blade. Now it's nice and even down at the bottom. So this raw edge will get sewn into something later. So I am all done with that and ready to move on. Next up, I'm going to finish the outside. I'm going to add my accent pieces to my outsides. So I'm just going to move those over. This for you might be cotton or canvas. For me, I'm using cork, so it's not interfaced, just to keep it a little bit less bulky. And you might notice that your corners are a little bit different. They're deeper on the outside than they are in the accent. The reason for that is to eliminate some bulk in the finishing steps for the corners. So what I'm doing is just lining it up down on the bottom here and lining it up on the sides. And when I turn this over, you'll see that there's a little bit of a gap, about 1/4 of an inch in those corners, and that's totally fine. That's exactly how it should be. So once you have that where it needs to be, you can clip it if you need. You're gonna do the same with the other outside and take this to your machine and top stitch. I do like to do a double top stitch up on the top edge here, which is the curve. You can do a single or a decorative, it's totally up to you. For the sides as well as the bottom, I like to stitch within the seam allowance to keep it nice and flat. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So I have all of my pieces ready to go. I have my zippered pocket made. I don't need that for this step, so I'm gonna set that aside. I also have my 2 lining pieces and my 2 outsides. I just have one of each for right now. I have my double zipper. I've grabbed my scissors, some pins, and some clips. I like to use both when I'm adding the zipper. So what I've done is I've marked the top center of all 4 of my pieces. So these 2 are also marked as well. I'll need those in a bit. I have just a little mark within the seam allowance on the right side of the outside and the lining. On the zipper, I've gone ahead and marked on both sides in the center. Doesn't really have to be perfect, so don't worry if yours is off a little bit, but this will help so that when you're adding your zipper, you don't have one side come up short on you. I've also gone ahead and I've stitched the ends of my zipper closed. I did that on both sides. I just stitch back and forth across the teeth several times to lock that in place because I like to pin my zipper open. I find it a lot easier to add it onto here. It's much more flexible. So let me show you how I like to do it. I'm going to take this lining piece and I'm just going to set it aside for right now. I'm going to start with my outside and my zipper. And the first thing that I like to do is move my pulls to the opposite ends. And that's why I like to stitch there. You can also add a pin or a clip, but I find that if I stitch, I'm not concerned about the pulls coming off. So I'm just gonna start on one side. So I'm just gonna grab this one side, and when I'm pinning, this is the only side that I'm going to pin. I'm not gonna touch this second side. I'm gonna put my zipper right side down on this outside piece. So I'm just gonna flip this over. I'm going to align my center marks right here and add a clip. I am using cork, and yes, I do still use a few pins with it. I use mostly clips, but if I need the pins, I will do that. And I'll show you, especially if you have fabric on the outside, where I like to use the pins and where I like to use the clips. So what I'm gonna do here is first, just clip along the top straight edge. Just do that part first. Then we're gonna do one curve at a time. So what I like to do is make very small snips along the tape. I don't want them any deeper than 1/4 of an inch. In fact, I try to keep them as small as I can, maybe about 1/8 of an inch. That's gonna make this zipper tape more flexible. It's already pretty flexible, but do you see how that kind of bows up? It can be hard to sew. So what I do is take my scissors and just make some little tiny snips. They're, I'm gonna say roughly 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch apart and less than 1/4 of an inch in depth. That's gonna help to make this zipper super flexible for me. So just a few. And then what I'll do here is add a clip or a pin. If I'm on fabric, this is all pins. On cork, I'm gonna try to do as many clips as I can, but if I do have to use a pin, it's not the end of the world. The cork will hide a lot of the holes with its texture. So I'm just going to use a couple pins right on the tightest part here. Okay. You can stick with clips. I know that some of you are probably cringing, thinking, oh my, I would never, ever put a pin in cork. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So I'm just going to go around here. Now, when I get down here, if I notice that my accent piece is extending further past the outside than it should be, I'll go ahead and trim that because I want to know exactly where I need to be lining everything up. And keep clipping. And I don't worry so much on the straight edges. Now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. And this time, again, I'm going to make my little snips just a little bit. They're really, really small. Try to hold that up for you. Just a little bit. It just helps to add some flexibility. So like that. And use some clips. And if it's not perfect, it's okay, because once you get to your sewing machine, you're going to take these clips out anyway. So you can try and use your fingers or a stiletto, which is very helpful for this step, to get everything lined up. So do the best that you can. If it's not perfect, it's okay. So now that I have this all clipped in place, now I'm ready to baste. I'm just going to baste this about 1/8 of an inch around before I add this lining piece. If I do all of it at once, I tend to get puckers in the corner where it's kind of standing up because it will fold down on itself like this. So I find that if I baste this first, that I have a lot less issues when I add my lining piece. This second half of the zipper is not being used at all. It's just gonna sit free here if you wanna bunch it up and put a clip on it, but I just let it kind of hang. So I'm gonna take this to a sewing machine. I'm just gonna baste right around here, about 1/8 of an inch, and then I will add this piece on, and then I will sew 1/4 of an inch. So let's go baste. So I have my zipper all basted in place, and now I'm ready to add the lining. But before I do that, let's talk for just a second about feet. Sometimes using a different foot can make all of the difference in the world to your stitching and to how your piece is turning out and how many pleats and puckers you're getting, because obviously we want as minimal as possible. So on the machine that I'm using, it is my HD9, so I do have a little bit more limited offering on my feet because it is a straight stitch machine. So I can't move my needle from left to right. If I was making this on my domestic, what I typically use for my basting is this foot right here. This is either a stitch in the ditch or an edge joining foot, has that guide in the center. And what I would do on my domestic is move this all the way to the left, move my needle position, and then I can use this, and it helps to baste because I would just be kind of riding along that edge, and I'm not touching the zipper teeth or too much of the zipper, so I'm not affecting that. That can be what happens if you're using the wrong foot, is that this will kind of push over, or you'll end up sewing a pleat in because of where your foot is hitting. I also have this 1/4 of an inch foot with a guide, which I do like, and for this I can absolutely use this. But a lot of times with these zippers, what I don't like is this foot, even though my 1/4 of an inch is going to be over here, the foot itself is touching my zipper. So it's touching right along those zipper teeth. And sometimes when I get to this corner, it doesn't know where to go. So it'll veer off, or it will go over, and it will end up tacking that down. So try some different feet that you have. You might even want to try a zipper or a cording foot, something that's not going to touch the zipper teeth, because that's when you're going to shift things. So try some different feet before you get frustrated and see which one is working for you. That's going to help you to make this process much easier. So I'm going to keep the foot on that I already have. I could switch out to this 1/4 of an inch foot, but for today, I'm just going to leave that one on. So now that I have this done, trim my little threads. This is basted in place, so I don't really need a lot of clips. I might use 2 or 3. Sometimes I don't use any. But what I will do is take this. I have my center mark here, and I can see that my center is right here. I've also marked it right up at the top here. So I just kind of extended my line. So I am gonna clip right in the center there. But other than that, personally, I don't find that I really need clips. You might wanna add a couple on the sides just to hold everything in place. It's totally up to you. Everyone's comfort level is a little bit different. Once I have this lined up, my bottom edges are lined up, my curves are in the same place. My lining piece is extending past my cork back here, but it's going to line up with the accent on the bottom. And now that I have this in place, I'm going to stitch it 1/4 of an inch. So ideally, I do like to start at one side and stitch around to the other. But if you're having any issues, you can always stitch your straight sides if you want to stitch a little here and a little bit here. And then you can come back in and do your curves, or you can start here and work out, flip the piece over and come back out. Stitch it however it's most comfortable and it comes out the best for you. When I get to this part right here, what I don't want to happen is that I don't want that to flatten out and get caught and end up making my zipper look kind of ugly when it's done. So what I do when I get to my corner is I'm very, very slow, and I constantly take my fingernail and I rub it along the edge. I'm pushing those zipper teeth out of the way, and I'm feeling with my finger, like right now I can feel that it's kind of in the way. So if I was at the machine, I would push that down, scoot around that corner slowly. And then when you're done, if you do end up with any little puckers or pleats, if they're small and you're okay with it, you can leave it, as long as it's not affecting the functionality of the zipper. If it's big and it's in the way, you don't have to rip this entire thing out. You can rip out a little chunk, push it in, use your stiletto, or even use the tip of your scissors if you have to. Use that to kind of push it down, fix that little spot, and then we can go on. So I'm ready to go. I'm going to take this to my machine and sew 1/4 of an inch and make sure that I back stitch when I start and stop, and I'll turn it right side out, and then we'll go on to the other side. So I stitched my 1/4 of an inch and I turned it right side out. I checked very quickly and I didn't see any puckers. It's not the most perfect corner. This one came out a little bit nicer than that one. This would be the time for me to make the decision if that little bit where it's not a perfectly rounded 1/4 of an inch is going to bother me, or if I want to let it go, and I'm going to let it go. I think it's fine. You have to also remember when it comes to the finished product that your zipper is sitting kind of flat on top. You're not looking at it from this angle. So a lot of times when it doesn't look perfect, it ends up being just fine when you're done. One other thing I forgot to mention, we talked a little bit about feet and trying different feet out when you're making your wallet. I also use my knee lift. So on my 15,000, my domestic machine, it has an automatic pivot for my foot. So when I stop sewing, the foot lifts up, and that helps me to adjust a little bit. If you don't have that and you have a knee lift on your machine, try using your knee lift. It's going to help when you go around these corners and you have to keep stopping and kind of readjusting and moving your fingers. It's much easier than trying to hold it, lift your foot up, put your foot back down, and come back to what you're doing. So if your machine has a knee lift and you're not using it, try it. If you use it and you just hadn't thought to on bags, go ahead and give that a go. So now that I've done this, I'm going to do the same thing with these other halves on the opposite side of the zipper. So again, I do like to stitch with my zipper open, but here's how I make sure that I don't twist it when I add pieces, the second pieces on. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to zip this up a little bit. Not all the way, because I'm just going to unzip it again. But I do like to zip that, and you can see right there, my zipper is twisted, so I'm going to pop that around. Much easier to find out now than in the end. Here's one little thing that might put you at ease. If for some reason you finish this, you add these pieces, and you find out that you have put a twist in your zipper, you can take the pulls off, readjust, and fix it. That's why I don't cut the ends of this zipper until I am at the very, very end. So all I do is just like that, just to make sure that nothing is twisted, everything's nice and straight. I'm again gonna start with my outside piece. I'm gonna line up that center mark with this center mark on the zipper. I'm on the opposite side, and I'm just gonna put a clip there. And then what I like to do, even though it's not where it needs to be, I'll add one little clip here and one little clip here. I'm just barely on the edge so that I can go in and unzip. And now I know that when I'm done, my zipper is going to be straight and not twisted. So if at any point during the finishing steps it feels like it's twisted, I know that I just have to move things around a little bit. So I'm just going to move that side out of my way. I'm going to do exactly what I did the first time. Do my clips, do some little snips on the curves. And if you don't feel comfortable making those little snips, you don't have to. I've seen a lot of people sew zippers on curves without doing that. It's just something that's always worked really well for me. It's just a little tip that I like to give. But right now I am clipping this without it. I think it's fine. I just like to do the little snips better. So I'm going to finish clipping this. I'm going to take this over to my machine. I'm going to base this half, and then I'm going to add this half right on top here, and then I will have both of my halves sewn in place. I'll be ready to press and top stitch. Both of my sides are all pressed and top stitched. When you're top stitching, make sure that you are not sewing down your little gussets. You want those out. You don't want to tack them down. So now that both of my sides are done, now I'm going to go ahead and add my little zippered pouch right here. So I just want to be adding that to one of my lining pieces, not the outside. And it doesn't matter which one you add it to. And you can find the center on here. I just kind of eyeball it like that. I'm gonna go ahead now and stitch that down at the bottom about 1/8 of an inch. I went ahead and just basted my little zippered pocket here just to 1/2 of the lining. My lining and my outside are not connected at the bottom on either halves. So now comes the part where we're going to put the wallet together. You're actually getting really close to the end here, but these can be some tricky steps. A couple of things to keep in mind. Wallets, because they're smaller, can be a little bit harder to get your hands in. So you're going to want to be patient, take your time with this, use some clips if needed. I've always got them around. Sometimes I find that they get in my way, so I'll do a lot of these finishing steps without them. It all depends on what works for me. If you're doing cork on the outside or anything really stiff on the outside, that is going to add a little bit of an extra challenge. It's still totally doable. And yes, I am doing this on my heavy duty machine, but I have made all of my samples up until this point on my domestic machine without any issues. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to zip up my zipper and get my poles into the wallet. And this is that point where this might happen, where it looks like something is twisted, but you're just going to turn your zipper and, kind of untwist it however you need to. So I'm just gonna do this first side, tuck those little gussets down for right now, move my zipper pull right into here, and do the same thing on this side, untwisting my zipper. And like I said before, I know that my zipper is not twisted. I know that if it looks like it's twisted, it's only because one of these pieces has kind of turned on itself. If for any reason I've made a big mistake and my zipper is twisted and it's not gonna work, like when I zip this up, one of these pieces is turned, you can snip the threads off the end here, take one of your pulls off, straighten out your zipper, and then put your pull back on if you have to. I know that sounds a little daunting, but at least you do have kind of an escape route if something goes awry. So now that I have my zippers in here, and I bring them kind of up to the corners, now what I need to do is put both of my outsides right sides together and both of my linings right sides together. So as of right now, my two linings are already right sides together. So all I need to do is flip this one around to the other side. And I'm just gonna work my hands in here. And here's another little tip. If you are turning anything, whether it's the finished product or at a step like this, and you have some layers of cork and interfacing and they just don't want to turn and they're giving you a hard time, take this to your ironing board, hit your bag with some steam. You don't have to iron it, but if you just kind of warm it up with your iron on both sides with steam, it will soften this and it will make this much easier. But I am turned. It looks awful right now because it's going to for a little bit until it looks pretty. So now that I have that together, I'm gonna grab some clips. I'm gonna clip just this bottom edge of the two outsides, right sides together. And I'm lining that up right there, just like that. And I'm just gonna add some clips where I need them. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with the lining. So I have my two outsides clipped together, and now I'm gonna clip my two linings together. My zipper is still really long and hanging off the edge. Resist the urge to cut those ends. You are not ready yet. Those ends need to stay long until you are just about done, which you are getting close, but resist that urge. I know sometimes you think they're in the way, I'm just gonna cut them. Don't do that. So you're gonna take this little squatty piece and you're gonna go over to your sewing machine, stitch 1/4 inch all the way across the outside, just the bottom. Don't do anything with the zipper or the corners. Back stitch when you start and stop. So you're gonna go all the way across here. On the lining, I stitch about 1 inch, which actually brings me right to the edge of the zippered pocket. If you stitch onto the zippered pocket, that's fine, but I'm gonna stitch right in to where I touch it and right in on this side, just so that I can leave an opening in here that I'm going to turn the wallet. Because even though it has a zipper, you are gonna still need this opening to turn. So I'm gonna take this to the machine and sew that with 1/4 inch. So I've gone ahead and I've stitched all the way across the bottom here on the outside, and I've stitched just a little bit on each side of the lining. I do backstitch several times right here and here to reinforce it because everything is going to be pulled through this lining in the next step, and so I really want to make sure that nothing is going to pop out, that I don't lose any of my stitches. I also like to, again, warm this up with my iron before I turn it. It will help to turn that really nicely. I have not cut my zippers. I am not ready to do that. And I'm just gonna go ahead and pull everything through. So here's the easiest way that I've found to do this is I reach in and I kind of grab half, and then I just kind of keep working. And that's why you want to leave this big opening. You don't want to leave a tiny opening. I'm going to also reach in here and pull out that zippered pocket right there. So there's some bulk. And then I'm just going to keep turning like this. And if I need to, I can open up that center, my double zipper. Sometimes that helps to give you a little bit more room to work. but I'm just gonna work slowly. And if I get stuck, I'll warm it up with my iron. I'm telling you, it's a great trick to turn things that are stiff. It makes them turn a lot easier. So I'm just gonna get anything I can turned and out of the way. And there's the other half of my zipper. Once I start to see that, I feel a little bit more hopeful because now I know I'm almost in the clear. There we go. And now I'm just gonna pull this zipper tail out and unzip, and that's gonna help me. So now I can get this really flat. So I'm gonna check everything here. I've caught all my seams, I'm good. So before I close this up and do the corners, which I would say is probably the trickiest part, number one, because it's thick, but number two, because it's a small area to get your fingers in, I need to close up the lining. I like to do that now. I'm gonna trim these little threads. I will give this a quick press before I do it, but what I'm gonna do is I'm going to be tucking the zippered pouch in, and I'm gonna fold this edge over. That way I don't see any raw edges. If need be, take some of your pins and you can pin that if you need to. I find that it's actually easier if I just kind of use my fingers. I sew with this on top, and what I'm gonna do is pull the outside out of my way, like so, and just kind of turn that edge. A couple of things that you're gonna want to keep in mind for a couple of these inside finishing steps. They're not gonna look perfect. When I stitch this and I stitch along here to close this edge, I might have a nice straight line on this side. I might be down a little bit or up a little bit. I'm gonna let that go because I know that the outside is going to look great, so I'm not gonna stress about how the inside looks. Also, you may have noticed when I was sewing that I squish this wallet and I push it and pull it whatever way I need to. You're not going to damage it, and you're going to make your life easier if you're not afraid to push it down, pull things out of your way. Obviously, you don't want to rip anything, but you want to be a little bit kind of rough with it and get things where you need them to be. So right now, I need this outside out of my way, so I'm just going to keep tugging. Take this to the machine, give this a stitch right here, and then press it, and then I'll be ready to do my corners. My zippered pouch is all stitched in. It looks great on this side, and on this side, not so great, but guess what? I'm not gonna stress about it. When the wallet is done, it's going to be standing up just like this. You're not gonna see that stitching, and anything you put in the wallet is going to cover it. So I'm not gonna stress about that, even though normally that would be something that would absolutely drive me crazy. I'm gonna let it go. So now it's time to do the corners. We are going to trim the zippers and make the corners, and I would suggest that you do one at a time. Just take this step slowly. Keep your scissors on hand. You're gonna have a little trimming to do. Use clips if you need to. A lot of times I don't use clips, but I will use them to show you how. But a lot of times I just hold it with my fingers. So now let's go ahead and we're gonna zip the wallet up so the lining is facing out. So my outsides are gonna be right sides together. I'm gonna come in here and again try to untwist this zipper. There we go. And oops, added another twist. There we go. So my zipper is perfectly flat, just like that. And I have the pull in the wallet, and there's my tail right there, that nice long tail that we've been leaving for this step. If you trim before this step, it's going to make this step 10 times harder, and this step is already a little tricky. So I do not cut my zipper until I am absolutely ready to do this, box my corners, and I'm 100% sure that it's where I need it. So we'll just double check again. My outsides are both facing in, my linings are both facing out, so there's my outsides. They're in there together. My zipper pulls are up here. I still have an opening, but I've left them within the wallet, so they're actually tucked down in here. My little gussets are out here. We're not going to do anything with those just yet. We're going to do the corners first, and then we'll get to the gussets. So when you sew the corners on this wallet, you are going to have a raw edge down in the bottom. Again, I'm not super concerned about it because when the wallet's finished, it's not very noticeable. So don't stress too much about that. So what I'm going to do is one side at a time. I'm going to come over here. I'll just push those gussets out of the way so they're not in my view. And I'm going to trim my zipper. Okay? So just 1/2. Go ahead and get rid of that. If you're trimming off your pull, you've made a mistake. Your pull should be inside the wallet. And now I'm going to take my hand inside here. So my hand is on my cork on the outside part, and I want to box this corner. So I want to flatten this out right here. And I'm just going to take my wallet and kind of squish it, flatten it down. Your wallet is going to look kind of messy, okay? I did just press it a little bit just to press out some of those creases, but I don't really care right now. I'm more concerned with flattening this out. So at this point, I'm looking at the back side of my zipper. I can see my cork is right there, and I can see my lining. And when I look at this, I can see that I'm crooked here. My lining and my outside are not the same. They're not lined up. I'm going to kind of roll this over, get the zipper, there we go, a little bit more in the center. It should be lined up on that seam. And I'm going to trim. I'm going to take a little bit of that lining off because when I sew 1/4 inch, I want to make sure that I am catching all these layers. And I am more concerned with the outside. If my cork layers are way down in there and I'm not going to catch them, that's going to be a problem. I want to sew 1/4 inch across here. So if you want, you can even grab your ruler and just kind of look. And if I do my 1/4 inch seam, I am definitely catching my cork. So I'm just going to put a clip here and put a clip here. Again, normally I don't clip that part, but you absolutely can. I am going to highly suggest that right now, you take this to your sewing machine and you sew across here. You're going to do 1/4 inch a few times. I'm going to, for demonstration purposes, prep my other side so you can see it one more time. But I would suggest that you prep one, sew one, prep the second, sew the second. So again, let's go right over here to this side. I am squishing my wallet flat. This is the top of my wallet. This is the bottom. I am folding it nice and flat. Cutting my zipper tab. I cut a little bit of my lining too. That's okay. So I said tab. I meant tape. Cutting my zipper tape. There is my seam for my outside, and there is my zipper. I want those as lined up as I can. It doesn't always happen, but I'm going to do the best that I can. And I'm squishing. And even with cork, I can squish this. And if this is too much, put a clip out here. Put a clip over here. Okay, this is that moment where you do whatever you need to do to make this work. I can see that I'm pretty straight on this side. I'm not at all unhappy with that. There is my zipper. Right side is down. There's my cork edge right there. And there's my fabric. I think this side looks pretty good. I'll add a couple of clips, take it to my machine, and now I'm going to sew 1/4 inch. So let's say that you are ready to sew this and your machine is struggling. It doesn't like all these layers. Here's a couple of things for you to try. Number one, change your needle. It might have been a while since you've changed it. You also might have a bend in your needle that you can't see. It could be facing towards you or away from you instead of side to side. So change your needle. Try a size 90-14. Step number 2, to try and get through these layers, change your foot. Try a different foot. Try a walking foot. Try something different that you haven't used if that foot is not working for you. Also, increase your stitch length. My normal stitch length for regular stitching for seams is anywhere from 2.4 to 2.6. Try to bump yours up to 2.8, 2.9, even go to 3. Getting through thick layers with a longer stitch length is easier. Don't be afraid to squish it. I'm going to keep this wallet squished and flat like this so that I can put it right in my machine and be ready to sew. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get through these layers. I do have a heavy duty machine that I know is going to take this, but I have done all of these on my domestic and I've gotten through all those layers. If you're still having problems, if you can stitch through here and kind of, work your way, you can go back and forth, take a few stitches, hand crank if you have to. If you have an automatic lift on your foot, take that off. Let your foot stay down because it's going to hold your fabric better while you're making adjustments. Get across here at least once and then reinforce as much as you possibly can. I'm gonna stitch across here one time and I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna kind of reinforce back and forth on there. And take this to my machine and sew my corners. My corners are all stitched. I turned my bag right side out so I could check. Here is a little thing you may or may not have noticed on camera. I made my own little boo-boo. Right here when I was demoing how to straighten out your zipper, I was accidentally unzipping it. So what I did is I pushed it together as best as I could. I didn't want to lose my pull by trying to fix it, and I stitched over it back and forth. If I zip all the way down here, I can get those teeth back together. So I've got a couple of teeth here that aren't totally lined up, but that's okay. I did the best I could to align my zipper teeth with my bottom seam on both sides. And everything to me looks great. I'm always more concerned with the outside than the inside. Obviously I want everything to catch, but I want my outside to be as perfect as it can be. It looks like it just needs a good press, and then I'm ready to do my gussets. So before I do any pressing, I'm gonna turn this one more time, lining side out, just like this. And I'm gonna take my gussets together and I'm just gonna sew right along this edge about 1/8 of an inch. On the machine that I am using, it doesn't have any problems going through these corners. Remember, when you turn the corner, you have a little bit of extra bulk there. If your machine has any issues with that, what I do is start kind of here and sew out, come back, I turn the wallet over and sew here and go out. Sewing into thickness is easier than trying to sew out of thickness. So if you have to, you can do that. I'll demo both ways on my machine so you can see how that looks. My gussets are all sewn. I've trimmed any little threads that I have sitting around. Before I turn this right side out, just wanted to show you this little piece that I've been using for a couple of steps. This is a hump jumper. This was purchased, I believe, on Amazon. A friend bought this for me. They're pretty easy to find, but what this does is when you put this underneath your foot, you're gonna put it in the back. It's going to lift your foot up just a little bit to help it go through some of the thick layers. I demoed that for a couple of steps, so you might have seen that in the video. It's a great tool to try out if you're having issues with some of the thick layers. So now that I'm done and everything is good to go, I'm going to turn my wallet right side out, poke those corners out. I can give this a good press, and other than that, my wallet is done. I did skip the keychain tutorial. That's a pretty easy one to put together, but that would be the only thing I would have left to add to my wallet if I choose to do so. Other than that, it's ready to go and I can add all of my goodies and use my wallet today. I hope you enjoyed this video and it helped you to make your Sammy Zip Wallet. If you're in the Facebook group, please go ahead and post a picture. If you aren't in the Facebook group, come and join us. It's just under So Many Creations. I also have my So Many Creations Facebook page where you can find me, and you are always welcome to email me if you have any questions.